Welcome to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today, we are looking at the emotion of anger. We're going to look at the data it tells us and review that. We'll look at body manifestations, functioning and underfunctioning and overfunctioning. And I'm going to do all of this with a lovely post titled, Am I the Asshole for Screaming at My Friend Out of Frustration Because She Always Uses Me?
All right, I got this one. Okay, the author is a 14-year-old girl, and her friend is also a 14-year-old girl. Author writes, I screamed at my friend D out of frustration yesterday. My friend is a pretty toxic person. When we are at school, she doesn't talk to me. She usually just straight up ignores me or just walks away to talk with her friend group. She only talks to me when she needs help understanding something about the lesson material, to copy my homework, or ask for a book. I don't mind. It's usually pretty easy for me to help my friends with school. She will often say, I forgot my book, I didn't know we had class today, or just won't bring it on purpose because her back hurts and she didn't want to carry more books. She's an athlete, and it's understandable because she is training and usually competes in competition for prizes. But she always complains about how hard her training is and that she just wants to leave practice but never does. So we had our first lesson yesterday, but no one brought anything for the lesson. No pens, no pencils, literally nothing. I was the only one with a pencil case in the whole class, so everyone started asking me for pencils to do some work. I just got so annoyed because why do I need to give them everything, and why can't they even say a simple thanks? So when we got back from class, I just got so frustrated and fed up with everything. I walked up to her and just started screaming at her about how immature she is and how I can't understand how she is still alive when she can't even bring a pencil to the lesson. I shouted how she just uses me for homework and just free stuff. So after I just screamed at her and let out all my frustration, I went to my best friend, let's call her Kay, to just calm down and prepare for the next lesson. As I was trying to calm down, something else happened that made me so mad at Dee, I just wanted to scream at her again. One of our friends from our friend groups came up to Dee to ask about why I just shouted at her. And guess what Dee said? She, meaning the author, is just mad at me, D, because I asked for a pencil. Even though I told her it's about how she uses me for everything when I was just screaming at her. At that exact moment, I was so angry and sad at the same time, I just wanted to cry. A couple minutes later, my eyelid starts twitching. It was just awful. I couldn't concentrate, and it was so uncomfortable. Later that day, I asked my mom about my eye, and it's probably because of stress, but I'm not sure. I kind of feel like the problem here. What should I do in this kind of situation? She is a decent friend and the only one who lives close by me. Am I the asshole? And if I am, what should I do to save our friendship? Oh.
Good old anger.
Good old anger. Good old 14-year-old girls. Anger. The recipe for a lovely experience. What was your first impressions when you were reading this one?
I thought this was typical 14-year-old drama because it's all over the place.
Yeah.
Even in the body of the post, at the beginning, the friend is one thing. At the end, the friend is something else. She's having all of these emotions in this very small time span. We're kind of triangulating with our other friends in our friend group. Everything that you kind of see typical young adolescents do as they're learning kind of social norms and how to interact socially and getting used to hormone changes and everything else. It's a crazy time to be alive.
What a ride, adolescence. I guess that's one of the reasons that we say you can't diagnose borderline until 18, because every 15-year-old girl would be in a psych hospital for borderline personality disorder,
Yeah.
Wild, wild little people. Yeah, my first thought was this girl has very low standards for friendship and probably very low self-esteem, that she views a parasite as a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little alarming. Definitely there's some kind of that pecking order at that age is so icky, Okay, so we're going to use this to talk about anger. So in our previous episodes, we did the emotions 101 back in the
Mm-hmm.
winter. It kind of gave an overview of that. So as a revisiting, me and Erica believe that, emotions are neither good nor bad. They are just simply signals of different
Yep.
things. And so the goal of healthy functioning and good coping is to figure out what the emotion's telling you and then resolve it through whatever, how you're leaning on the spectrum, depending on what you need. So what we're going to do in this first post here with anger is we're going to talk about, the function of it, how it feels to experience anger, what it looks like when there's too much and not enough. And then we'll do a second part to this episode in which we'll talk about the coping skills, whether we're too high or too low on the anger spectrum and what to do when we're in that state.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to us about the function of anger, Erica.
Yes, I love anger. Anger is probably one of my favorite
I love it
emotions
too.
to deal with in therapy.
Yes.
It gets a really bad reputation
Mm-hmm.
because I think most people are only seeing anger in its kind of too much phase and the aggressiveness. Um, so, at its core, anger tells us where we need to set boundaries. To help us do that, another thing it does is it gives us a voice. So, when we are feeling angry, we probably need to speak up on something. That something is probably related to one of our boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what's it look like when there's too much, not enough, and then kind of healthy anger, we'll call it.
Mm-hmm. Too much anger, we have aggressiveness or rage, is
Mm-hmm.
how we feel that. We probably feel the rage. We're probably acting aggressively at that point. This could be verbal aggression where we're yelling and screaming like she's doing here in this post. This could also be behavioral aggression where we're throwing things. Or if we're really maladaptive, we're taking our anger out on a person or an object.
Mm-hmm.
Too little anger, we're going to see behaviorally some passivity. Emotionally, this is going to feel like frustration or resentment, possibly some annoyance. All of that is going to be kind of what we're feeling, some synonyms for these.
Mm-hmm.
Balanced, we will feel our anger behaviorally. What this will look like is assertiveness. So this is us saying like, hey, please don't do this. This really bothers me, or this hurts my feelings, or our good old boundary framework. If you continue doing this, then I will need to do that.
Mm-hmm. I notice with I don't know, tell me what you think. I notice with especially I think clients who are internalizers, and also I think more so women, that anger is viewed as like a bad thing. It's some kind of like being out of control, or like,
Mm-hmm.
do you find that too? That there's like it's like almost like a value, like a virtue signaling that like bad people get angry.
Yep.
Do you kind of hear stuff like that?
Absolutely. I get a little bit more the gender stereotype. I definitely see that. But I also see it with people of color
Mm-hmm.
where we have like the
Yeah.
stereotypical like Karen,
Right, like
right?
angry white lady.
Angry white lady. This is now just like this social norm, but we still have these subsets of society like black women can't be angry or she's like this mad black lady.
Mm-hmm.
So I also see like that connotation in this character of virtue playing out within different cultures and ethnicities.
Yeah, and so I think like I think stoicism can be an admirable quality, to be able to regulate yourself. But I think
Mm-hmm.
like that people I think really villainize anger, where I'm like not having enough can almost it could be damaging, just like having too much.
Yeah.
Like you need to have some because you're not going to be able to stick up for yourself or communicate effectively if you don't have it.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like who's the victim,
Right.
right? The too much and the externalizing of our anger, other people or things around us are usually going to become the victim of that rage.
Mm.
Whereas our passivity folks and our passive people, they're internalizing all of that. They are the victim. They feel terrible about themselves. They usually have low self esteem. They usually feel they don't have the right to set boundaries or to take up space.
Mm. Yeah. That's kind of how I talk about, the point of anger is to give us a voice. Too much anger, our voice is too big. Not enough anger, our voice is insufficient. And then that,
Mm-hmm.
that balance is where we're just like directly communicating, And we got, we did one of our very first episodes, maybe in season 1. We got
First
into
one.
depth. Yeah, where we talked about kind of these communication styles. So this will be kind of a throwback. This is specifically in the context of understanding anger as opposed to just kind of a framework for communication. But we go more into all the different communication styles too in our early season 1 for listeners if they want to
Mm-hmm.
check that out. So what does it feel like when you're angry? Like how like what are the physical cues that you're experiencing anger?
Me personally, or in general for our listeners?
You decide. You decide the level of self-disclosure you want to do.
Our typical too much anger kind of prototype here. It's an energizing emotion, so we're probably seeing like increased heart rate, heart pounding. A lot of people will experience heat, like a surge of heat. So face gets hot. I think muscle tenseness. You see a lot of people like clenching fists or clenching jaws.
I would say like cartoon characters that are really it's like that's like it's usually like their face, right? Like there's like their veins
Yes,
kind of
the
pop
vein
out,
popping.
steam's coming out of their ears, so it's that like that hotness,
Mm-hmm.
hot-headedness, right? That literally is like a physical sensation for
Yeah,
it.
way we describe somebody who's quick to anger, they're hot-headed. Yeah.
That's really where we feel it.
Yep.
Okay.
Me personally, when I'm really irritated, my ear will get really red. I'm an internalizer.
Yeah.
And so I don't have a lot of like external anger. I usually like chew on that for a bit. But
Yeah.
one ear, usually my right one, will get really hot and I'll be bright red. And sometimes I don't realize I'm stuffing shit down and somebody be like, your ear's red. Is it okay? And I'll be like, fuck, what am I mad about?
Like my little angry ears going off, huh?
Yes.
That's interesting. I like that one. Yeah, I think I definitely I lean towards the rage. Yeah, for me it's like it's a really heavy surge of like adrenaline. Like I feel really amped up, or yeah, mine's like the heart beating sensation, I think. But I think a lot of I've even had clients sometimes even describe like almost like a blackout state of saying something like my mind just went blank, like I just went into like this autopilot. And I think it's like this really instinctual, like again, even though it's not necessarily a fear response, that fight or flight I think can really still be real and conflict,
Yeah.
because it can be I'll have like cognitive responses where I'll start like thinking of reasons to blame people or reasons I'm not wrong or all the things I want to say, or I'm running like fake scenarios in my head or ruminating on conflict. So I've noticed my cognitive response. I get into like lawyer mode too, where I'm like, whomever is arguing is about to lose this argument with me. Which, yeah, so I try to avoid those interactions too much anymore. Oh boy, it's an intense way to feel.
It is. It is.
Yeah. Okay, so the physical presentations of it. With this post, kind of detail out for us where this passivity was coming in and what that looked like, and what the rage or aggression looked like.
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice it?
I'll do another throwback to season 1, episode 1, communication styles. We talk about an exploding doormat where we all only have this finite amount of space within us. So if we are stuffing our emotions and stuffing these boundary violations and we're not using our voice, eventually we will run out of space to stuff and then we explode. And we're seeing maybe the more typical rage aggressive response. So I want to start there as I go through this. There are a few things that I'm seeing in here. Passivity. Literally, our second sentence. When we are at school, she doesn't talk to me. She usually just straight up ignores me or just walks away with her friend group. This obviously bothers her. She bothered her enough to include it in the post. And yet, nowhere in here does she talk about the one-sidedness of this friendship.
Yeah.
Right? So she's not necessarily getting her needs met in the friendship. but she's
Mhm.
not speaking up on that. So she's being passive there.
Yeah.
Also, loaning of the books, loaning of pencils, helping with the homework. There's some passivity there. Some of it is normal within a friend dynamic. If you forgot a pencil, I'm going to ask my friend before I ask like the weird kid in the back of class.
Right. He probably ate them all.
So some of that is normal, but if this is like a recurring theme and again, it's not reciprocal, there's nothing you're going to your friend to ask for, or they're not helping you with like emotional needs, anything like that, we're going to start feeling that build of resentment, which we saw here.
Yeah. She seems to feel like she has very little to offer this relationship. She's really kind of just trying to share as many like resources to establish a sense of worth in the dynamic, because aside from that, it doesn't really seem like she knows how to get this person to engage with her.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and that's kind of, I guess, passivity that can look like a trait with like, people, talk about people pleasing. This is a really, I think, extreme example of that, or even like, martyrdom, where she's saying, "Oh, I don't mind, I can help out," and then one day it's like, "Well, has she not been fine this whole time, and I've hated it, I never said anything." It's like, whoa, you've been like falling on the sword for this for a while. Yeah, so I think passivity over time can really have like those patterns like that.
Yeah. And I think those are common characteristics that we see. We talk about like fight or flight response earlier.
Yeah.
There's also freeze and fawn. And so fawning is more of, I usually say like Stockholm syndrome. People are somewhat familiar with that, where you just kind of align with the people and you figure out like harm reduction. What can I do here to decrease my risk of harm? And a lot of times that's, let me just make myself valuable to them.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be meeting their needs. And we see this a lot with kids who maybe grew up in emotionally neglectful homes, where they are essentially taught your worth is in your value to other people, because that's the only way they maybe got any type of feedback from caretakers, is when they were meeting caretakers' needs. So like, mom had a hard day at work and you're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. What can I do for you? Let me do the dishes." Like, "Oh, you're the best kid ever."
And then like, "Oh, acts of service. So I just need to be really sacrificial, and then people will love me."
Yeah. And then through the years, that pattern just continues in other relationships. And then we get to adolescence, and I have several adult clients struggling with the people pleasing and difficulties asking for their needs to be met in their romantic relationships or in their friendships or even at work, and being able to say like, "I deserve a raise."
Yeah. I was talking to clients about this like 2 days ago. I think, and that's kind of how I talk about the aggressive and passive too, is like aggressive when you're having, say, a conflict, you're focused on just your needs being met. And so you're gonna like bulldoze the other person, like we're not gonna be compromising, there's no win-win, it's a right or wrong. And then in a passive person, they're more focused on the other person's needs getting met, because that's what will dissolve the conflict. So they're going to kind of put their needs to the side and just focused on that self-sacrificing. And so, again, we're saying this out where her friend is, quite selfish. And so this friend is being passive and just like focusing on the other needs being met more and more, like you said, thinking it's going to earn some kind of affection or attachment from that person. Yeah. Where do you think the rage started? This was a scorekeeping. This was like the straw that broke the camel's back, wasn't it, on this stuff?
Yeah. Obviously, we have a very limited view of the author's life, of the dynamics with everybody in her life. But what I can imagine from reading this, we were scorekeeping with this one friend, feeling not of value to this friend. And so we have that building, and we're like just about to boil over. And now not only is this friend asking for something, but the whole entire class. And again, this could be, we have to keep in mind she's 14. This could be a bit of an exaggeration that it was everybody in the class. I find it hard to believe that not one other person, unless there was maybe 3 people in his class.
It's like her and her friend group or something. Yeah, seriously.
So there may be a sense of exaggeration here, but to her, it felt like everybody in the class is also now taking advantage of her.
Yeah.
And that was enough to take her from 2 inches of wiggle room to we're like boiling over and making a mess on the stove.
Yeah. Mm.
And I think that's the aggression. That's your typical pattern of exploding doormat. She just ran out of room and then something happened that topped it off. And for her, I think it was this addition of not only is this person who I say is my friend doing this, now all these other people who I'm not even considering my friends seem to be taking advantage of me as well.
Mm. Yeah. So really, it took something, it really got personal, I think, there,
Mm-hmm.
huh? Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes when I'm working with clients, there's a lot of valuable things to be learned when we act a way that we don't prefer. And
Yes.
so if this was my client, I think I would have, you know, because she got so amped up, she's now in a state of needing to kind of cool down, right? A passive person doesn't have to go through that process of like de-escalating from anger as much because they haven't like exploded. It's like that heightened like arousal state isn't quite amped up to that level. But I think so obviously there was points to where we could have de-escalated before explosion, but I would with this client I would like to focus on like when did you notice that you started to feel bothered by this?
Mm-hmm.
Because like, I think that there's a lot of I think some of those cues that scorekeeping can be kind of death by paper cuts, but lots of times we can kind of pick up on those little red flags of like I'm not really comfortable, but we don't really give them maybe enough space to really explore that. So with this client, I think I would start working on developing some intuition for like boundary violations, because I don't really she doesn't really she needs to do a lot of justification of like, oh, it's
Mm-hmm.
okay that she asked me to carry her books because she's too tired, or it's okay she's not prepared because I'm a good student, I don't mind helping her. Just because you can
Mm-hmm.
help her doesn't mean that you should be doing that.
Yeah.
So that might be kind of like where I would like to go with that is like, let's go back and do a little autopsy on
Yeah.
this scorekeeping.
I know this is true for me. I've seen this in some of my clients. I don't want to say like this is a blanket presentation, but some of our listeners, if they lean more passive or people pleasing, may also experience this. The boundary violation cues for me
Mhm.
typically present as anxiety. I start to get anxious when I have to interact with these people because
Mhm.
people violating our boundaries also trigger like safety concerns,
Yeah.
which we'll get into next week. Safety concerns are a function of fear,
Mhm.
right? So when I'm having to engage with somebody who makes a habit of violating my boundaries, I typically get anxious about these interactions. Or I'll notice my thoughts. I get a lot of like the future tripping or future planning in my thoughts of like, how can I interact with this person? How can I make this engagement kind of seamless and no conflict? And so I'll notice a lot of planning is happening for me internally as a result of the
Mhm.
anxiety, which comes as a result of boundaries being violated.
I think that feedback loop makes like a lot of sense, because I also that's what I normally feel. It's like a little it almost feels like my heart flutters, but in like my tummy for a second it'll be this like boom of like a ick, and then I'm like, oh, I didn't like that. But I think that can be a confusing sensation to sort through real time,
Yes.
because it feels like guttural and isn't. Sometimes my body notices that there's a boundary violation before my mind is picking up on it. And
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're an internalizer, that can take some time to kind of sort through like what really disturbed me about that. You know, yeah. So that's again, too. Like none of these emotions are bad, right? But if we didn't have that anxiety pop or like that appropriate anger, we wouldn't be able to navigate relationships effectively. Like we need those things.
Yep.
Hmm. Okay. And this, you know, since next episode we're getting to coping skills and we're the kind of psychoeducation in this first episode, I do think talking about the anger iceberg as a framework might be helpful at this point.
Mm-hmm.
When I was using this in, so for listeners who don't know, me and Erica worked at a facility with mostly forensically involved clients, and I worked with high risk of domestic violence perpetrators. So we talked about anger like a lot and communication like a lot because they have harmed people. And a lot of the anger management use the framework of an anger iceberg. And the idea is that, anger is almost a symptom of some kind of other emotion. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
what's above the water is a small amount, which is the anger. But when you look below the surface, there's all these other experiences coming out. So that would be kind of a different framework for how we're talking about anger here, because we're saying anger is a primary emotion. It has its own function, is to give you a voice. And so I think some of the benefits of the anger iceberg, if that's a framework for anger that you prefer, is that I think it teaches quickly that anger is letting you know that something else is going wrong. It's not just stopping at the anger. It's letting you know that like you have to dig. And I also think it can make somebody recognize, okay, I have to de-escalate from the anger before I'm really able to explore what the anger is telling me. I cannot operate and function like in this high arousal rage state. The con I find with the anger iceberg is that it views anger as a problem. It's to
Mm-hmm.
be resolved, because it's like, well, you're not really angry, you're actually sad. Or you're not really angry, you're more so mad. And I'll think that there's a lot of buddy emotions, especially for the high, the high arousal, or the
Mm-hmm.
balance between low and high. But I think I like the framework of the 6 core emotions over the anger iceberg, because I think it gives anger the space that it needs, unless it's lets us know how to interact with anger in a little bit more of a constructive manner. What So that was kind of my monologue about the anger
Mm-hmm.
iceberg. What's your thoughts of that framework? I think that's when I've talked to clients, it seems to be the thing that most people are familiar with anger, is the concept
Mm-hmm.
of the anger iceberg.
Yeah. I agree with the 6 core emotions. That's my framework as well. I think anger is necessary. I think if we de-villainize it,
Yeah.
we're able to utilize it more effectively. We're able to engage in our lives more authentically. How I incorporate the anger iceberg is really just in showing how interconnected all of our emotions are. Rarely are we experiencing just one thing. And
Mhm.
so saying, oh, well, anger is really just a mask, and what you're actually feeling is this, it's no, maybe you're feeling both, and
Mm.
you don't have to choose. And to kind of take it back to like safety,
Yep.
some of the other emotions, a lot of times, if you Google an image of anger iceberg and you look at the other emotions under the water, we're just kind of assuming people know this. With icebergs, what they say is you see like a very small percentage of the berg above the water,
Mhm.
right? The majority of the mass of that structure is underneath, and that's why it's dangerous, because you think it's maybe small because you're only able to see this
Mhm.
tiny proportion. So
Yeah.
what that's really saying is anger might be there, but it's tiny and insignificant maybe to what's underneath, and that's not true. But circle back to like my main thought. The emotions that are usually in the underwater visual are usually de-energizing emotions. They're emotions that typically make us feel very vulnerable.
Mhm.
Anytime we have to be vulnerable, that can feel unsafe.
Yeah.
And I think if we look at aggressiveness, typically somebody who is aggressive is more in a protective state, right? In that feedback loop, that makes sense that anger would then show up when we are also experiencing more vulnerable emotions.
Mhm. I
So
like that.
I will use it, but I'll turn it back into the 6 core emotions framework
Yep.
and then normalize it's okay to feel both. You don't have to minimize anger. Anger can show up in an equal part to embarrassment or hurt.
Yeah, you're almost like saying like, "Hey, let's remove the water line because it's actually all just one iceberg. We don't
Yes.
need to make this like false like duality kind of in that, huh?"
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a mask. It's just also there.
Yeah. Hmm. We drain out the oceans and then we can all just get all of our feelings. Cool.
One of the lines she states is, how is she still alive when she can't even bring a pencil to lesson? If we are
Mhm.
having thoughts like this is
Yeah.
probably a sign that we are being used. They are functioning in their life without us.
Yeah. This was
Make
enabling,
no
looks like.
mistake. Yeah.
Yeah.
Make no mistake, they're functioning without you. The only reason they're not functioning now is because you don't make them.
Because basically, she's also saying, like, it seems like she would die without me, right? Which is like the essence of like codependency and rescuing
Yeah.
and all of those
hmm
thoughts.
Which I
And
bet
that's
that
a
makes her feel important and feels needed. And if she
ooh,
grew up not having needs met or feeling that's where her worth is and being needed to other people,
yeah,
that's playing into that dysfunction and meeting that dysfunction's need.
totally. And she's totally trained this friend how to treat her, right?
Of
Like
course.
she
That's
has
what we say is
actively
boundaries are.
participated, right? Like she has invited this. She's totally yeah, participated in this dynamic developing. She's not, a victim here, I don't think. That's I think another sign of of this could be, I guess, anywhere. This could be resentment, or this could actually just be rage, as those like kind of character assassination thoughts of like one behavior being extrapolated to who this person is as a individual. So
Mm-hmm.
because she can't bring a pencil to class, I don't even know how she's surviving without me. Like that's a lot, and that kind of shows just like that scorekeeping and that
Yep.
level of like learned helplessness that we're allowing.
Mm-hmm.
There's this concept of over functioning. Lots of times this term could be used sometimes this is describing like a very type A personality who's kind of maybe even controlling or domineering. This can come from just
Mm-hmm.
a high energy person who has a lot of initiative. And over functioning in this way is basically one person is giving everything and one person is taking everything,
Mm-hmm.
is what's happening here. And that can be, I think some of the most long-lasting toxic relationships are between like a narcissist and a borderline, right? Or between an aggressive personality and a passive personality. A lot of times when we're high on these polarities, there's an overall sense of that feels balanced because both people feel really extreme, and so it can really create some of these like intense like kind of toxic interactions where the passive person continues to meet the needs of the other person, and then the aggressor continues to take the love from the passive person and not providing
Mm-hmm.
it back to them. And I definitely think in this post, the author is becoming the overfunctioner, and her friend D has become the underfunctioner, which is obviously a great framework for resentment to build up and
Mm-hmm.
to common in a codependency dynamic.
Yeah. I think it's also worth mentioning the example in the post seems more deliberate, that the friend who we're calling D is under functioning.
Mm-hmm.
There are dynamics, and I've seen this play out in relationships where the other person is more than happy to pull their weight. The overfunctioner is having difficulty letting go of that control.
Totally.
And so if you're feeling like you're overfunctioning, don't just assume the other person is taking advantage of you. It could just be they helped clean up and then you came behind them and cleaned it again because it wasn't done your way.
Or criticized because it wasn't. Yes, they're not going
Yes.
to take initiative when they're afraid of their face getting bitten off.
Yeah. So we're not necessarily saying like if you're feeling taken advantage of, somebody's purposefully doing that. It could just be you're contributing to that dynamic also, and it's easier for them. This is kind of like that fawn response. I'll just let you do it because that seems to create less conflict. So they're choosing passivity there.
Mm-hmm.
And you're choosing passivity, and I'm not going to ask them to do it.
Which
and you just do it.
This is like any cohabitating couple who's splitting division of labor is attuned to that
Dynamic.
exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy, I talk about that a lot in my sessions. it's hard for everybody, I think, but
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so we'll give the "Am I the asshole" verdict on this episode. Next episode, we'll go into how to deal with being an asshole. What's your stance? Is the author the asshole or not the asshole?
I think the author is an asshole for a couple of reasons.
Calling a 14-year-old girl an asshole just makes me laugh. I think it's hilarious.
To me, she's the asshole because she's not showing up and participating in her life effectively.
Mm.
She's letting a lot of things slide, and she's scorekeeping. I always tell my clients, if you want to let things slide, that's your choice, but you also don't get to hold that against them because you're making the conscious choice to do so.
Yeah.
So you have to like pick a side. Either it bothers you and you speak up, or it's not that important and you no longer hold that against them, but you don't get to do both. That's like one of the rare times I say this is not one of those, it's going to be both.
Is that a both and on that one, huh?
Yeah, that's an either or. So she's letting things slide and then she's holding it against them. Then when she did get angry, she just kind of blew past assertiveness and went straight into rage and aggressive communication with it.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of I think she's kind of like almost, she's punishing a friend for having low self-esteem. I think it's almost like it's like lashing out at somebody because I'm not able to set boundaries, where it's, and so yes, I think that does make her an asshole, that she kind of threw herself on the sword for so long and then use that as justification to really just snap and get quite savage. And obviously it sounds like in her outburst she wasn't maybe even communicating very effectively, because the friend's takeaway was like, I guess she's mad because I asked for a pencil. Right. So I think just in terms of being able to close a gap between like what might go on in my mind versus what's coming out of my mouth, I think that there's a lot of space she still needs to cover on that.
Yeah. Well, and to link that back to the communication styles,
Mhm.
typically, if we are communicating from one of our polar end states of passivity or aggressiveness, that's not effective communication.
Right.
Nobody's going to say like, you're a good communicator. The only people who really get that are assertive communicators.
Yeah. And I mean, this doesn't, obviously the author has room for growth. I think the friend is also an asshole. Obviously, I think
Yes.
she's a user. I think she's a manipulator. She probably knew why her friend was mad and was just having low accountability, even, I'm guessing, too. Maybe antagonistic. So again, I'm not saying that the friend is blameless in this, but I think the author just had a lack of boundaries and then got really deregulated. And I think she's responsible for being more clear.
Yep. The majority of the time, people are going to do what works for them. I don't know if this was part of like the communication episode or this was another one, but we kind of talked about kids doing things to get their needs met. So if throwing a tantrum in the store gets their parent to buy them the candy bar, the next time they want a candy bar and the parent says no, they're going to throw a tantrum because that's what got them the candy bar the first time. That worked for them. They're going to continue to do it. That mentality stays with us throughout life. We do what works for us. If I don't want to carry 10 books in my book bag because it's heavy, and I have a friend who will just lend me her book or help me with my homework, then
at the least resistance.
Yeah, that sounds like that's going to work out pretty well for me, and that's what I'm going to do. So people are designed to do what gets their needs met. And so that fault lies on you to make sure they're getting their needs met is not depleting you of your needs being met, which is what happened in this dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. All right. Ready for a summary? Any other thoughts on this one?
Nope. Go ahead. Summarize it for us.
You summarize it? Okay. So anger's a good emotion to have. It's healthy. We need it. When it's functioning in a balanced way, it helps us have a voice. And lots of times that's just expressing another emotion, or that could be setting a boundary. When there is too much anger, that looks like rage and is often aggressive, both in behavior and communication style. When there is not enough anger, we say that's passivity and can feels like more kind of like stewing emotions like resentment or frustration. The risk of being aggressive is that you're kind of dominating other people in your life. So you're more focused on getting your needs met. And for the passive communicators, they're trying to meet the needs of other people to avoid conflict. And so there could also commonly be this pattern of kind of this over functioning and under functioning in more aggressive and passive relationships. The anger iceberg, although not negating the value of the framework. That isn't necessarily the way that we're organizing anger here. So if that's a method that you prefer, you can use it because it's helpful to let you know that lots of times there's buddy emotions with anger, and that we need to check out kind of what's going on with the anger. Anything else I missed?
No, I think that is probably the high points.
Okay.
All righty. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts, questions, and feedback. You can reach out to us on Instagram at Assertive Podcast, or send them to us via email, assertivepodcast@gmail.com. That's what we have for you on this one. Until next time.